So when I think about the paradigms for relating to the church to the world and their effects, I currently think in terms of like four different paradigms that I see operating. And these are generalizations, and they certainly don't map on any given congregation perfectly. But they're not always self-consciously held. I mean, sometimes they're not self-reflectively held. They're just sort of things that they're patterns of behavior. But I tend to see, I think that was a little complicated. So let me.
Yeah, the caveat up front. Maybe you could tag that on the end, or just say these are general operational.
Yeah, I think that's right. Okay. All right, you can just try that again.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So when I think about the paradigms for relating church and culture and their effects, right now I tend to think in terms of four different paradigms. The first one is what I tend to call fortification. And fortification is a paradigm that tends to talk about the church's life primarily in terms of the preservation of the gospel and the deposit that we've been given from the harms of the world. And the strengths about that are that it really calls us to recognize the call to be a peculiar people, and it does recognize the dangers of life in this world. But the weakness of it is it tends to fundamentally understand God's relationship and the church's relationship with the world in oppositional terms, and to only think about the life of faith as a life of withdrawal and preservation. And I don't think that that's sufficient for the kind of vision of an incarnate God that we have in the Bible. And so I think it has some good effects in that it does tend to guard the deposit, but it also strangely alters the deposit in the act by not guarding the incarnational faith. So, but I see the fortification tendency in me and in other places in the church, and I think we really need to evaluate it. Another paradigm that I see is kind of the other end of the spectrum that I tend to talk about in terms of accommodation. And this paradigm tends to prioritize or think about the church's life in terms of the collaboration with our neighbors in the service of a common good. That there are problems that we need to solve in the world, and what we need to do is labor with our neighbors and go out into the world in that way. And the chief danger is not the peril of the world in this paradigm, it's the peril of a sectarian church. Now, the strength of that paradigm is that it does really take seriously the call to be salt and light and to go out into the world in a way that has a transformative effect. The weakness of it is that it often neglects the prophetic dimension of our life, which is to go out not in the world, not just in collaboration with it, but also in prophetic critique and the pronouncement of an alternative way of being the world and the church in the world. And so, while I think there are good things in the accommodation paradigm, there are also some weaknesses in it, and I see those in myself and in other churches as well. And so, we need to think about those critically. A third paradigm that I see is what I tend to call the paradigm of domination, which is a very interesting paradigm in America right now. But it basically goes like this: that the goal of the church is to take this gospel that we have and to go out and, through something like conquest, kind of take over the culture. It usually is in language of recovery or taking back the culture, things like that. But it usually uses martial images or military kind of imagery to think about what we're doing. Now the good thing about that is that it actually does want to take the gospel out into the culture, and it does want to see the gospel have transformative effect. But the weaknesses, I think, are really considerable in that, unlike the fortification paradigm, what it does is essentially sees the world in oppositional terms. Like, there's the bad stuff out there, and we want to go and kind of conquer that. And like the accommodationist, strangely, it ends up actually mirroring some of the worst and what I've in other settings referred to as Nietzschean character of our culture, which is where the goal of life in some ways is to assert your strength over another. And I think that in the end, what it does is it makes the neighbor not someone that we're supposed to love, but someone that we're supposed to defeat. And that's a serious problem, and I think it's epidemic in American evangelicalism right now, especially in the midst of election cycles. You see it emerge with great strength. And the three of those, for all their strengths and weaknesses, I think really are better served if we set those aside in some way, taking the best emphases. But we pick up a fourth paradigm that I call the incarnational paradigm. Other people probably use that language as well.